Warcraft is filled with heroes of all shapes, kinds, and races. But there is one that unfortunately became a hero for some pretty bad reasons. Hear me out. In theory, the story of zul'jin and the Mani tribe makes sense. To a point. A first glance at them would show you that they are in fact fighting for their native homeland. But once you delve deeper into this situation, you realize things are more complicated than them just being freedom fighters. Evil can work on a scale, and on the scale of evilness, the Amani are not the highest up there. They are not the Old Gods or the Burning Legion, but they're not all that down either. First, let's get into what started the conflict, and that is the Blood Elves, or then known as the High Elves or Highborn, decided to settle upon Troll lands because they found magic there and the place they lived in before was kinda bad. They ended up living in that bad place because they got ousted. They got exiled from their own land by their more druidistic kin because they decided to use magic once more after the whole, the Well of Eternity conflict and the Burning Legion invasion. And so the trolls fought back. It's interesting to note that the trolls hated elves. Even before the Highborn came there, they hated the Kaldari elves. And so it makes sense that the trolls would hate these refugees that just came here and decided to move upon their holy land. This hatred of elves blinded the trolls, and rather than finding a proper way to make a society to live alongside the elves, they decided to just go to all-out war. It's important to note that the Amani were not savages like the Darkspear. The Amani had a civilization, a culture that was more advanced than the Darkspears, yet with all that, they got blinded by hatred. Let's look at our modern world, for example. Now, we know that Europe is filled with refugees at this point, and we understand as a civilization that you cannot strike at them just because you have a certain hatred for something that happened dozens, hundreds of years ago. In the modern world, we understand that diversity is a power, diversity is strength, and that is what builds European nations to become far greater than they could have been if they just remained, with the local population without being diverse. But if a certain place is so filled with hatred, if we look at Poland, for example, for refugees, they end up as a weaker nation, blinded by hatred and incapable of making proper decisions. And this is what the trolls really are at that point. Peaceful options existed for the trolls to take, but the trolls were never a nation that, was that peaceful, because they even had skirmishes with the human tribes to the south of their empire. The trolls were warmongers in a way, and because of that, they had a society that considered that might makes right, especially in a case where they feel they are the victims. And that is very important. The Amani trolls live with a victim mentality that their land was stolen from them. And at this point, you might as well make the argument that it was stolen from them. But the Amani's actions to not find a proper solution to coexist with these elves that are not the same elves that they fought against is really their downfall. You cannot strike at the refugee population just because they want to coexist in a space nearby you. That is the most important aspect. The trolls do not want to have peace. The trolls want problems, they want war. And that is why they started fighting against the High Elves every chance they could. That is why negotiation and peace was never an option for the trolls. That is why war was their whole point. And we know the cycle of hatred cannot be broken. It is the mistakes of your forefathers that carry on unless you try to do something better and fix those mistakes. But yet the trolls did not do that. And some might argue that, the Highborn were exiled with a purpose, but the purpose and the reason why they were exiled is hypocritical. They were exiled because they wanted to use magic, and to use magic in a more responsible sense than what their forebears have done, than what the evil Kaldari have done, the evil Highborn. And they were exiled by people that use magic that comes from a different source. And you can really see the hypocrisy in it, because once the High Elves, the Highborn, managed to make their own kingdom, they live for thousands of years in peace. There is no Burning Legion that comes out of the Sunwell. The Highborn have proven to the Night Elves and to everybody else that doubted them that you can use magic in a more responsible sense without inviting demonic forces. And they've managed to do it. They've managed to build a society as if should have been made in the first place in the Kaldari Empire. The truth of the matter is that the Highborn were right. The druids were wrong. When Illidan Stormrage created another Sunwell, what did the druids do? They created a tree in its place, blessed by the aspects and so on. Yet still magic was involved. What made the tree so powerful was the well of eternity that it grew from. And the whole history of Warcraft, it never invited demons. Sure, Archimonde tried to destroy it, to use its energies and so on. But it lived normally, much like the Sunwell did for years upon years. The elves were right. The High Elves were right. The Highborn were right. Magic can be controlled and used to the benefit of society without incurring demonic invasions. And if you think otherwise, then I guess we must advocate that the Warlock class be shun out of the game completely, that any mention of warlocks being good or having the ability to become a warlock should be outright casted in fear of demons coming back in. But we understand that hindsight is 2020. The trolls couldn't have known that the Highborn were right after all. Yet there was no chance given, there was no peace negotiation, there was only outright war. And history has shown us that the native population can lose when it goes to war against an invading force. We can simply look at the Komachi War of Extermination and see the results of that. We can look at more modern history. We can look at World War I or World War II, the NATO invasion of Afghanistan, Iraq, and so on. We can look at all these wars and we can see that native populations lose when they start war against a force they are not prepared for. And for all intents and purposes, the Amani tribe was prepared for war. Their hatred for the elves was so powerful that they were prepared for war. They knew what they were getting into, and they even asked the Zandalari for help. The elves went on and made an alliance with the humans, and thanks to a barrier and some more shenanigans, the trolls ended up losing. Zul'jin would carry the hatred. Zul'jin will not break the cycle of hatred, and that is the biggest problem. Zul'jin would rather prefer to ally himself with an evil horde than to make peace with the elves and find a proper resolution. Unfortunately, in World of Warcraft there is no two-state solution, though one could have been achieved if the trolls were willing to negotiate and cooperate with the High Elves. In truth, there is no such thing in the World of Warcraft. And so Zul'jin will try his best to win a land that he didn't know of, a land that he couldn't really call home because it was never his home. There are many better options the trolls could have used, and unfortunately none of the Amani thought to break the cycle of hatred. None of them thought to move on and make a better society peacefully alongside the elves. A society that would have really helped them overall when it comes to events such as the Third War. But that never happened. The Amani preferred their hatred to cooperation, to understanding, and that is the biggest problem with Zul'jin and this idea of Amani liberation. Sure, some may argue that, well, it makes sense that they're fighting for the land. It doesn't matter if it's been hundreds or thousands of years, it is still their land. And unfortunately, they failed to do that. What do we think of people that decide to march with tiki torches in certain towns and scream that they will not replace us? We can consider those people fools, and we do consider most people like Tommy Robinson and other nationalists fools. Because in truth they are. They prefer to hate rather than try and make a proper society and live amongst those that would help them at the end of the day. And that is the problem with Zul'jin. Zul'jin isn't a liberator. He's not a Che Guevara. Zul'jin is a Tommy Robinson. And supporting his actions is pretty much supporting Tommy Robinson. We do not want to support nationalist extremists or other vile influences in our society that try to weaken us by destroying the diversity that makes things wonderful. Let's be honest, even people like Tommy Robinson eat curry and other ethnic foods whilst complaining about the people that are making his food existing in his country. And we can see how vile and evil this whole aspect is. And that is the problem with Zul'jin and the Amani liberation idea. Unless they find better solutions to live peacefully with the elves, then they are doomed to fail just as nationalism failed in the 20th century, and as people like Tommy Robinson and other nationalists around the world will fail. Because the trolls choose not to have one united society that lives peacefully with its neighbors like in the EU, they choose to turn this whole thing into a North Korea-South Korea situation, but with more war involved. Boy, I'm just taking the piss out of this. I don't care. Let's just kill all trolls and be done with it. Yeah, vengeance for Zul'jin, huh? Scoreboard. Scoreboard. Troll losers.